The sun hung low over the horizon, casting redstone and molten gold and long, trembling shadows. Leora's heart raced as she walked briskly down the dusty main street, her worn boots kicking up tiny clouds of ochre dust. The town had that eerie stillness that comes just before danger, the tumbleweed rolling lazily across the boardwalk, the faint clatter of a distant horse, and a whisper of wind through the dry sage. She gripped the handle of her father's old pistol, a relic she had never imagined she'd need. Her fingers slick with sweat. It was then that she saw him. A tall cowboy, his silhouette sharp against the sinking sun, rode toward her like a predator closing in on its prey. The jagged scar across his cheek seemed to twist as he sneered, his cold eyes gleaming with cruel intent. Liora froze for a moment, every instinct screaming at her to run, but the dusty street offered no refuge. The hooves of his horse pounded the wooden planks like thunder, each beat echoing in her chest, making it impossible to distinguish her own racing pulse from the sound of imminent death. "Stop right there." "Little lady," he growled, the words carrying a dangerous promise. Leora's fingers tightened around the pistol. Her mind spun with memories of the stories she had heard, the unpunished cruelty of men like him, the merciless way they terrorized women and left families in ruin. She knew she was no ordinary target. She was 30, experienced in handling hardship, but she had never faced something like this. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she forced herself to breathe, trying to steady her trembling hands. Then came the shadow. A figure moved across the sun's dying light like a streak of wind. A horse's powerful silhouette cut through the orange haze, moving faster than anything Liora had ever seen. Dark hair flowed behind the rider, long and unbound, catching the last rays of the sun. Tribal jewelry glinted across his chest and wrists, each piece telling a story of battles fought and survived. The rider's eyes were fixed on the cowboy, sharp and burning with controlled fury. Before she could react, the figure, the Apache, threw himself forward with a practiced grace. He collided with the cowboy's horse just as the man raised his pistol, sending both of them tumbling into the dirt. The cowboy cursed, scrambling to his feet, but the Apache was already there, steady and unyielding. His movements were precise, fluid, a deadly dance honed by years of survival and war. Leora's chest heaved as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. "Are you hurt?" the warrior asked, his voice low and calm, yet carrying an unmistakable urgency. Liora shook her head, unable to find words. Her heart was still hammering, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could feel the dust on her cheeks, the heat of the sun baking her skin, and the intensity of his gaze fierce yet protective. The cowboy, glaring with rage and humiliation, slowly backed away. Knowing better than to fight this stranger? The Apache did not lower his stance, his amber eyes fixed on the man until he disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he turn to her, his expression softening. "You're safe." "For now," he said. His voice had a calm authority that seemed to soothe the tension coiled in her chest. Liora nodded, still trembling, as the reality of her near death began to sink in. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and sweat, mingling with the faint trace of gunpowder. She realized she had never been this aware of her own fragility, nor of the danger that could strike at any moment. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, the words feeling inadequate against the enormity of what he had done. The Apache only nodded once, eyes scanning the horizon as if threats could appear from the very air itself. "I'm Tahome," he said. Finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen far too much, yet retained a sense of honor and purpose. Liora repeated the name softly, committing it to memory. Somehow, she knew this stranger would change her life forever, though she had no idea how, or in what ways. The course of her existence had just shifted beneath the sinking sun. The desert around Redstone was quiet again. but Liora could feel the pulse of danger still lingering in the shadows. One thing was certain. The world she had known, with its rules and safety, had just ended. And with it, the arrival of Tahome marked the beginning of something entirely new, something thrilling, terrifying, and utterly unavoidable. The canyon walls loomed high above them, jagged rocks slicing the late afternoon light into slivers of shadow and gold. Liora followed Tahome cautiously, her boots crunching over loose stones, her pulse still racing from the encounter in Redstone. The air smelled of wild juniper and dry earth, sharp and clean, a strange comfort compared to the stifling dust of town. Every echo of their footsteps seemed amplified, bouncing back from the canyon walls like the ghostly warning of danger, lurking somewhere unseen. Tahome moved with effortless grace, his muscular frame fluid and commanding even in the narrow passage. The sunlight caught the metallic glint of his tribal jewelry, and Liora's eyes followed the patterns etched into his bracelets and chest ornaments, wondering about the stories behind them. There was a quiet power in the way he navigated the terrain, a natural ease that spoke of years surviving in the wilds of the desert and mountains. "Where are we going?" Liora finally asked, her voice breaking the canyon's eerie silence. "To a safe place," Tahome replied, his amber eyes scanning the cliffs above, alert for any signs of pursuit. "This canyon is hidden from the town. Few know of it. It's where I can watch without being watched." Liora swallowed, feeling the knot of fear in her stomach loosen slightly. There was something reassuring in his presence, though the raw energy he exuded also reminded her that she was far from the comfort of safety. As they descended deeper into the canyon, the air grew cooler, carrying the faint sound of trickling water. Tahome stopped at a small natural spring hidden among the rocks, its surface shimmering in the dappled sunlight. He knelt and scooped water into his large hands, offering it to her. Hesitating for a heartbeat, Liora drank, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "You saved my life," she said, voice trembling with gratitude. Why would you risk yourself for me?" Tahome's gaze softened, though his posture remained poised and ready. "Because cruelty must be answered, and because I know what it is to see someone suffer when it could have been prevented. And because courage deserves protection." His amber eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, and Liora felt an unexplainable connection, as though he could see the fears and hopes she had buried for years. For a moment, the canyon was silent but alive, the water whispering secrets, the wind carrying faint scents of sage, and the shadows of the cliffs creating shapes that danced across the ground. Liora realized she could finally breathe, even amidst uncertainty. "I've been alone a long time," she admitted, her voice softer now. "After my family, after everything, I thought I'd only ever survive by myself." Her words trailed off, a mixture of sorrow and lingering pain in her tone. Tahome nodded knowingly, crouched beside her, the sun catching his taut muscles and the dark strands of his hair. "I understand loss," he said quietly. "I've seen people I cared for taken by greed, by violence, by ignorance. That's why I live as I do, free, cautious, yet ready to help when the right moment comes." Liora studied him, trying to read the depth behind his calm exterior. There was a storm of experience in his eyes, a history she could only guess at, but there was also a kindness, a respect for life that made her chest tighten. She realized that she had been terrified when the cowboy approached, but with Tahome there was a sense of trust, fragile yet undeniable. As the sun dipped lower, painting the canyon walls in hues of red and amber, Tahome motioned toward a sheltered alcove just beyond the spring. "We'll rest here tonight. The town is safer than before, but you must stay hidden until you can move freely again. I will not leave your side while there is danger." Liora nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in years, someone had intervened in her life not to control it, not to demand obedience, but to protect her, to give her a choice to live beyond fear. Sitting by the small fire Tahome made, Liora listened to the soft crackle of flames and the whisper of wind through the canyon. Shadows danced across the rocks, reflecting the unspoken bond forming between them. In that quiet, secluded place, she felt a strange mix of vulnerability and hope, knowing that tomorrow might still bring danger, but also realizing that for the first time, she was not facing it alone. And somewhere deep within her, a small, cautious spark of trust flickered, lighting the path forward in a world that had been defined by fear for far too long. The canyon silence wrapped around Liora like a heavy blanket, broken only by the occasional rustle of a distant lizard scuttling across the sun-baked rocks. She followed Tahome, his bare feet sure on the uneven stones, his muscular body moving with effortless precision. Every step reminded her of the fragility of her own life, and every glance at him brought a strange mix of awe and caution. Once they reached a sheltered alcove where the sun barely touched the ground, Tahome motioned for her to sit. The shadows stretched long across the rough-hewn rocks, and the faint murmur of the hidden spring created a serene rhythm, almost like the heartbeat of the canyon itself. Liora lowered herself to the ground, the dust clinging to the hem of her dress, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply breathe, but the calm was fleeting. Memories of the past surged unbidden, sharp as the jagged rocks surrounding them. Her family, her parents, long gone, taken by a greedy land baron who had cared nothing for life beyond his own wealth and cruelty. She remembered hiding in barns and alleys, always listening for the creak of boots, the cruel laughter of men who saw fear as entertainment. And now, even after all those years, the scar of loss was raw. Her heart ached with it. Tahome sat nearby, watching her without intrusion, his amber eyes scanning the cliffs above. She could feel his presence, steady and unwavering, and it struck her that this man had saved her without asking for anything in return. The weight of his strength, both physical and quiet, protective, was comforting, yet it reminded her of how vulnerable she had always been. "Why do you help me?" she asked softly, voice almost swallowed by the canyon's vastness. Her words trembled with a mix of fear and curiosity. Tahome's gaze met hers, deep and unwavering. "Because I know what it is to lose someone you love," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of experience and sorrow. "And because cruelty cannot go unchecked. You showed courage today, even when scared. That deserves protection." Liora's throat tightened, and she bowed her head, trying to fight back the tears that threatened. She had spent decades learning to survive alone, believing that trust was a weakness, that kindness was a gamble she could never afford. Yet here was a man, wild and untamed, offering protection without expectation. The notion was almost unreal. The shadows shifted as the sun dipped lower, casting strange patterns across the canyon walls. Liora studied Tahome, noticing the fine lines of battle and hardship etched into his face, the way his muscles tensed and relaxed with precision. He was a warrior, yes, but also something more, a guardian, a presence that made her feel safer than she had in years. "I've spent my life hiding from danger," Liora admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I never imagined someone would intervene. Someone like you. I've been alone for so long, I thought that was all I could ever be." She paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't think I'd ever meet anyone who could make me feel safe again." Tahome's amber eyes softened, and for a moment, the canyon seemed to shrink around them, cocooning them in a bubble of quiet understanding. "You are stronger than you realize," he said. "Strength comes not just from survival, but from the courage to face what you fear, even when it shakes you to your core." Liora lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time without fear. The intensity of his presence was both intimidating and strangely comforting. She realized she had been terrified when the cowboy approached, but now, despite the shadows of her past, she felt a cautious hope growing inside her. Perhaps survival was no longer just about running or hiding, it could also be about trust. About letting someone stand beside her in the face of danger. The sun sank lower, painting the canyon walls in brilliant reds and deep purples, and Tahome gestured toward a natural alcove that offered shelter for the night. "We'll rest here," he said. "The town is still dangerous, but you're safe with me." Liora nodded, a small, fragile smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something beyond fear, relief, gratitude, and perhaps the first stirrings of a connection she had long thought impossible. The canyon, with its shadows and whispered secrets, had become a place of both reflection and revelation, where past sorrows met present courage, and where a spark of hope began to take root in her heart. Sitting beside the small spring, listening to the soft gurgle of water, Liora realized that life had shifted in ways she could not yet fully understand. She had been rescued not just from a man, but from the weight of her own isolation. And somewhere deep within her, she felt the faintest glimmer of trust toward the man who had saved her, Tahome, the warrior who had stepped out of the shadows to change her world forever. Returning to Redstone after days in the secluded canyon felt surreal to Liora. The town looked smaller, dustier, and somehow more threatening than before. Wooden buildings leaned under the weight of decades, their paint peeling, windows reflecting the glaring sun like watchful eyes. She adjusted her shawl, feeling the coarse fabric against her skin, and tried to steady her breathing. Tahome stayed a few paces behind, his presence both protective and commanding. An invisible shield against the whispers that seemed to follow them with every step. The townsfolk had noticed her absence, and now that she returned, their eyes followed her like hawks. Murmurs rippled through the streets, some curious, some fearful, others bitter with envy. Mothers tugged their children aside. Men in dusty hats exchanged knowing glances. Liora felt the sting of judgment in the quiet whispers, a reminder of how fragile her position as a lone woman in Redstone truly was. She tightened her grip on the small bundle she carried, her father's old pistol hidden beneath the shawl, and kept moving. Ignoring the prying eyes, Tahome's amber gaze swept the town, alert and calculating. He remained a shadow at the edge of the crowd, his muscular form bare from the waist up, tribal jewelry glinting in the sun. He did not intervene yet, allowing Liora to walk with dignity, but his presence sent a subtle warning to those who might consider mischief. It was a silent declaration. She was no longer defenseless. A group of rough-looking cowhands leaned against the saloon, their eyes narrowing as Liora passed. One of them muttered under his breath, "She's back." With that, Apache. The words carried a mix of fear and mockery. Leora's stomach tightened, but she did not falter. Tahome's presence was a steady anchor, reminding her that she was no longer alone. That strength came in form she had never imagined as they moved deeper into the town. Liora noticed subtle changes in the way people looked at her. Some kept their distance, wary of the warrior who had appeared from nowhere to rescue her. Others stared openly, curiosity overcoming caution. She realized that her life had shifted irreversibly. Tahome had not only saved her from the cowboy's threat, but had also disrupted the delicate balance of Redstone, a town where fear and suspicion often ruled more than law. They reached a small, weathered inn on the outskirts of town. Liora paused, glancing at Tahome. "Will they accept me here?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Tahome's expression softened. "They will whisper, they will judge, and some may never understand. But you will be safe here, at least for now." He gestured to the inn's door, then stepped back, eyes scanning the streets once more. His protective aura was unmistakable, a silent promise that he would not abandon her while threats lingered. Inside the inn, the air smelled of dust, wood, and lingering smoke from the fireplace. The innkeeper gave a cautious nod, his curiosity tempered by the silent warning of Tom's stance outside. Liora allowed herself a small sigh of relief, settling onto the worn chair by the window. The sun's rays filtered through the dusty glass, casting golden patterns across the floor. For the first time in days, she felt a measure of security, though the shadows of judgment still lingered beyond the walls. Even in the quiet of the inn, danger was never far. Liora knew that the cowboy she had escaped from had allies, men who would not forget humiliation or loss. Tam's steady presence reassured her, yet she could not shake the knowledge that survival required constant vigilance. The town was a cage of whispers, of glances that could pierce skin as sharply as bullets dot as evening fell. Liora watched the sun dip behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. The world outside seemed both threatening and alive, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. With Tom at her side, she felt a cautious hope. Perhaps this town, with its rumors and scrutiny, could become a place of refuge rather than fear. Perhaps with the warrior's protection, she could finally reclaim a life she thought she had lost forever. For now, she would rest. But tomorrow, she knew, would bring more challenges. The town's whispers were only the beginning, and the shadows of Redstone were long and full of secrets. Yet, for the first time, Liora did not feel powerless. She had Tahome, and together, they were no longer merely surviving, they were beginning to shape their own fate. Night fell over Redstone like a velvet blanket, but the town's uneasy quiet carried a dangerous undertone. The shadows of buildings stretched long and distorted under the flickering lanterns, and the wind whispered through the wooden streets like a warning. Liora and Tahome had barricaded the small inn where she stayed, the door reinforced with spare boards and furniture. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked the lock again, the coarse wood scraping against her palms. The pistol she had clutched so often now felt both comforting and insufficient. Tahome stood near the window, muscles tense and bronzed skin gleaming in the dim light. His long black hair fell over his shoulders, tribal jewelry catching the lantern glow. His amber eyes scanned the empty streets, alert to the slightest sound, the creak of a sign, the scuff of a boot, the whisper of cloth against wood. His presence was a silent warning to anyone foolish enough to approach. This woman was protected. The first sign of danger came as a flicker of movement in the shadows beyond the street. Liora's breath caught in her throat as she glimpsed torches bobbing in the distance. The cowboy had returned not alone this time. He was with a gang, their faces grim, menacing in the lantern glow. Eyes fixed on the inn like predators circling prey. "Stay behind me," Tahome whispered. His voice calm yet firm, a stark contrast to the pounding of Liora's heart. She nodded, moving closer to him, the smell of sweat, leather, and desert wind mingling with the faint smoke from the inn's fireplace. Every nerve in her body screamed fear, but Tom's steady stance and unwavering gaze grounded her, giving her the courage she hadn't felt in years. The gang approached. The leader, a burly man with a scarred face, shouting, "Come out! That woman belongs to us." Liora's grip tightened on the pistol, but Tom's hand on her shoulder reminded her to stay calm. His muscles tensed, ready to spring, and she saw the deadly precision in his movements. Every sinew, every glance, every breath spoke of experience and lethal skill. Then it began. Sparks flew as bullets clashed with wood. The gang's shouts were sharp in the night, mingling with the deafening cracks of gunfire. Tahome moved with lightning speed, intercepting threats with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural. Liora ducked behind a sturdy crate, her body trembling but her mind focused. The smell of gunpowder burned her nostrils, smoke curling around the room. making the lantern light dance wildly across the walls. Tahome's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay low." He leapt forward, disarming one of the attackers with a swift strike, then pivoted to block another with the flat of his hand. His movements were a deadly dance, controlled yet unpredictable, a combination of raw power and honed skill. Liora watched, awestruck and terrified, as the man who had saved her life became a force of nature. The fight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the last gunshot echoed and the smoke cleared, the gang had fled, leaving scorched earth, debris, and the lingering scent of danger behind. Liora's chest heaved, her hands trembling from adrenaline and fear. She had survived, but the reality of what they faced was undeniable. The town's dangers were far from over. Tom turned to her, his chest heaving slightly, his amber eyes softening. "You are safe for now," he said quietly, though the intensity in his gaze reminded her that vigilance was still necessary. Liora nodded, unable to speak, her gratitude and awe tangled together. This man had not only saved her life, but had done so with an unwavering presence that left no room for doubt or hesitation. The night settled again, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. Outside, the wind carried faint whispers of the town, the groan of wood, the shuffle of feet, the distant murmur of suspicion and gossip. Liora realized that while the immediate threat had passed, survival in Redstone required constant alertness. Yet, with Tahome by her side, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope died as the embers of the fireplace flickered and the shadows danced across the walls. Liora understood that her life had changed forever. The town's dangers were many, but so too was the warrior who had entered her life. Tahome's presence was no longer just protection, it was a promise, a force that gave her courage to face whatever came next. And in that quiet moment, amidst the smell of gunpowder and dust, she felt the first spark of trust, deep and unshakable, growing inside her heart. The early morning sun glinted off the surface of a secluded river, its waters sparkling like scattered diamonds over smooth stones. Liora stood at the edge, her fingers grazing the cool, flowing water. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wild sage and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the dust and gunpowder that had filled the town just days before. Beside her, Tom knelt, his reflection rippling across the water, the morning light glinting off the tribal jewelry on his muscular, shirtless chest and wrists. For a moment, neither spoke. The river's gentle murmur filled the silence, and Liora found herself mesmerized by the calm presence of the warrior who had saved her life, not just once, but countless times since she returned to Redstone. His long black hair, dampened slightly by the river's mist, fell across his shoulders, and the amber eyes that had once scanned the town for threats now softened as they rested on her. "Why me?" Liora finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly, breaking the peaceful quiet. She turned her gaze to the river, as if seeking answers in its flowing depths. Tahome's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "Because you have courage," he said, his voice low, measured, yet carrying an unexpected warmth. "Because you fight even when fear tries to stop you. And because you are different. I have never met someone like you." Liora's throat tightened. The words were simple, yet heavy with meaning. She had spent years hiding, surviving, and fearing every shadow. To hear that someone recognized her strength, that they valued it, shook something loose inside her. For the first time, she didn't feel like a helpless woman at the mercy of the world's cruelty. Tom gestured toward a flat rock by the riverbank. "Sit," he said softly. She obeyed, the cool stone grounding her. He remained standing for a moment, surveying the river's bends, the trees lining the far bank, the occasional ripple where a fish disturbed the water's surface. Then he knelt beside her, careful not to invade her space, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, I've been living a life of solitude, Tahome continued, his voice almost contemplative. A life shaped by danger and loss. I protect, I fight, I survive. But I have never had a reason to open myself to someone. Not until now. Leora's heart fluttered at his words. She understood loss all too well, the void left by family, by trust betrayed, by love taken too soon. Yet here was a man, a warrior of the wilds, who had risked everything for her, who had fought not for gain, but for the simple act of protection. The realization struck her in waves, leaving her breathless. She began, then paused. Words felt inadequate. How could she express the whirlwind of gratitude, awe, and something deeper, something she barely understood herself that surged through her? She dipped her hand into the river, letting the cool water slip through her fingers, hoping it would steady her racing thoughts. Tahome's amber eyes softened further. You don't need to say it, he whispered. Actions, courage, and survival speak louder than words. And your actions have shown me that you are worthy of protection and respect. Liora looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. For the first time in years, she felt something fragile yet undeniable, a connection, a trust, a hope that had been buried under fear and solitude for far too long. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but she was still learning the rhythm of this new bond. The river flowed steadily, carrying the sounds of the wilderness with it, the chirping of early birds, the rustle of leaves, and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. In that quiet moment, Liora realized that survival was no longer merely about evading danger or escaping harm. It was also about trust, connection, and the courage to open oneself to someone who had proven unwavering in both strength and compassion. Tahome extended his hand. Palm open, a silent invitation rather than a demand. Liora hesitated for only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his grip was grounding, a quiet promise that she was no longer alone. The river flowed on, indifferent to the world's dangers, yet carrying the beginnings of something new, something neither of them had expected, but both could feel stirring within their hearts, for the first time since Redstone had drawn her into its dangers. Liora felt a spark of hope, cautious, yet vibrant, burning within her. And she knew, deep in her bones, that with Tom beside her, she might finally face a future she had never dared to imagine. The first light of dawn stretched over Redstone, casting the town in soft shades of pink and gold. Liora stood on the boardwalk outside the inn, the cool morning air carrying the scent of sage and dust. Her heart beat steadily now, not from fear, but from anticipation. The events of the past days, the canyon, the river, the gunfight had changed her, reshaped her understanding of trust, courage, and the strength that came from standing beside someone willing to fight for you. Tam appeared behind her, muscles rippling beneath sun-kissed skin, long black hair catching the light, tribal jewelry glinting faintly. He did not speak immediately, letting her sense the calm and protective presence he had offered since their first encounter. Amber eyes scanning the horizon, he seemed as much a part of the desert as the rocks and wind. A living force of nature and honor, Liora, he said finally, his voice low, carrying both respect and warmth. You have faced the dangers of this town with courage, but there is one choice only you can make now. She turned to him, uncertainty flickering across her face. What choice? She asked softly, the gentle morning wind brushing her hair across her cheeks. Tam stepped closer, the faint clink of his jewelry marking his movement. You've seen what the world can throw at you, fear, cruelty, danger. Yet you've survived it all. I ask not for your life, not for your obedience, but for your trust. Will you allow me to stand with you, always? Leora's chest tightened, the weight of her past pressing against the hope she had discovered beside the river. She thought of the canyon, the gunfire, the quiet nights when he had watched over her, his presence steady and unwavering. Memories of fear were replaced with gratitude, awe, and a deep, unspoken connection she could no longer deny. She began, struggling to find words that could capture the whirlwind of emotion inside her. Her hand reached for his, tentative at first, then gripping with certainty. "I trust you, Tahome. With my life and my heart." A slow, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face, the first one she had seen that was unburdened by wariness or duty. He knelt before her, one hand resting on the dusty boardwalk, the other holding hers. "Then together we face the world. No threat, no town, no shadow will break that bond." The townsfolk, who had begun to stir in the soft morning light, paused in their routines. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as whispers of the warrior who had saved Liora reached them once more. But today, something had changed. Fear had shifted to respect. People glanced at them not with suspicion, but with the quiet acknowledgement that this woman was no longer alone, and that the man beside her was not to be underestimated. Liora's gaze swept over Redstone, absorbing the sunlit streets, the worn wooden buildings, and the people who had once seemed so threatening. For the first time, she did not feel powerless. The town's dangers remained, yes, but so did the knowledge that she had someone who would fight, protect, and stand beside her, someone whose courage matched her own. Tahome stood, taking her hand and guiding her toward the horizon, where the desert stretched endlessly, filled with possibilities. "We begin anew," he said softly. "The past has shaped us, but it does not define us. Together, we choose our path." As they walked side by side, the morning sun gilding the edges of the town in golden light, Liora felt the thrill of freedom, tempered with the certainty of protection. The weight of fear that had once held her captive was gone, replaced with hope, courage, and the profound trust that comes from knowing someone is willing to risk everything for you. The river, the canyon, the gunfire, they were no longer memories of helplessness, but markers of resilience and survival. And now, with Tahome at her side, Liora felt the future unfolding before her, wide and bright, full of possibility and promise. She glanced at him, eyes meeting his amber gaze, and knew without doubt that this was the beginning of something extraordinary, a life no longer dictated by fear, but defined by courage, trust, and the unbreakable bond forged in the deserts and canyons of Redstone. The town of Redstone awakened behind them. But they were no longer simply part of it, they were a force together, unstoppable, unshaken, and ready for whatever dawn might bring. And in that quiet, golden morning, Liora whispered softly, almost to herself, "Yes." Together. Tahome's hand tightened around hers, a silent promise. The future was theirs, and nothing, not fear, not cruelty, not the shadows of the past, could take it away.